I watched through the glass of the storm door as her body went rigid. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The 120 volts coursing through her wet leather glove had locked her diaphragm instantly, welding her hand to the freezing cold iron. There was a sharp smell of ozone and singed leather cutting through the blizzard. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and the transformer on the pole outside hummed a low, angry note as the current turned her into a living conductor. She had covered the porch in black ice to make me slip and fall. She thought I was a senile old man freezing to death in the dark. She didn't know I was a master electrician, and I had just turned the handrail into an electric chair. Before I show you the wiring schematic that saved my life, hit subscribe. This is the story of the copper snake.
The silence was the first thing that was wrong. In a house this old, a house I built with my own hands back in 1978, silence doesn't really exist. The floorboards breathe. The furnace hums a low, baritone note that vibrates through the master bedroom floor. The wind usually rattles the loose pane in the hallway sash that I've been meaning to fix for a decade. But today, nothing. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling fan. It was still, dead still. I turned my head toward the digital clock on the nightstand. The red numbers burned into the gray gloom of the room. 12:14 p.m. My heart gave a painful, sluggish thump against my ribs. I had slept too long. The sedatives. She must have upped the dosage in my nightly tea again. "Just a little chamomile, Arthur," she'd said, her voice dripping with that sickening nursery school sweetness she reserves for me and the dog. "Helps with the joint pain." I sat up. The room spun, a violent, nauseating tilt that forced me to grip the mattress edge until my knuckles turned white. I waited for the vertigo to pass. It wasn't just old age. I'm 72, not 90. I was a master electrician for 40 years. I can still wire a 3-phase breaker box in the dark. This dizziness wasn't natural. It was chemical. I swung my legs out of bed. The floor was freezing. Not cool, freezing. I reached for my cane, the walnut one with the rubber tip, and pushed myself upright. My knees popped, loud as pistol shots in the quiet room. I shuffled to the door, expecting to hear the television downstairs. Jessica watches those mindless daytime talk shows at volume 50 while she pretends to clean. Silence. "Jessica?" I called out. My voice sounded raspy, weak. No answer. Then I remembered. The morning routine, the flurry of activity. Jessica packing a suitcase. She had come into my room at 8:30 a.m., dressed in her heavy wool coat, smelling of cheap perfume and stress. "I have to go to my mother's, Arthur," she had said, not making eye contact. She fell again. "Hip surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. David is still on his business trip, so I left you plenty of soup in the fridge. I'll be back in 2 days. Don't wait up." She had kissed my forehead. Her lips had been dry, cold, like dead leaves. That was nearly 4 hours ago. I shuffled toward the bay window that overlooks the front yard. The blizzard the weatherman had been screaming about for 3 days had finally arrived. The light coming through the glass was flat and milky white. I wiped the condensation from the pane with my sleeve and looked down. My brain processed the image before my emotions did. It was an electrician's habit. Look at the schematic, identify the fault, then panic later. The driveway is 100 feet long, a straight shot of asphalt lined by ancient oak trees. It was covered in a pristine, uninterrupted blanket of white. The snow was heavy, wet, and thick. Maybe 6 inches had fallen since dawn. I looked at the road. The county plow hadn't come by yet. The snow was unbroken. I looked at the apron of the driveway where it meets the street. Smooth, perfect, 0 tire tracks. I blinked, thinking the medication was hallucinating visual data for me. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. If Jessica had left at 9 a.m., her SUV would have carved 2 deep trenches through the slush. Even if the snow was falling at 1 inch an hour, which was heavy, the tracks would still be visible as depressions, shadowy ruts in the white surface. But there was nothing. The snow was a flawless sheet of paper. I looked closer, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. I scanned the walkway leading from the front porch to the driveway. 0 footprints. A chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window seized my spine.
It started at the base of my neck and radiated down to my fingertips, making them tremble. She didn't leave. She lied. The logic cascaded through my mind, hard and fast. Why say you were driving 3 hours to your mother's house? Why pack a bag? Why say goodbye? Why create a narrative of absence? There is only one reason to tell someone you are gone when you are actually still present: surveillance. I stepped back from the window, instinctively moving into the shadows of the drapes. My breath hitched. I wasn't the master of this house anymore. I was a rat in a maze, and the scientist was watching from behind the glass. Where is she? The detached garage, it had to be. It's set back about 50 yards from the house, connected by a side path I couldn't see from this angle. If she pushed her car down the driveway in neutral before the snow started sticking, or if she parked it in the garage last night and never moved it, she was sitting in there, waiting. But waiting for what? I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. Not from Parkinson's, but from rage. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just elder abuse anymore. This wasn't just skipping meals or turning down the thermostat to save a few bucks. This was tactical. She wanted me to think I was alone. Why do you want an old man to think he's alone in a blizzard? Because people who are alone make mistakes. People who are alone slip on ice. People who are alone have accidents that no one sees until it's too late. I looked at the phone on my nightstand, the old landline. I picked up the receiver. Dead air. No dial tone, no static, just the hollow silence of a disconnected line. Storm knocked it out, a naive man would say. I am not a naive man. The phone lines in this neighborhood are buried underground. I paid extra for that in '98 after the ice storm. The only way that line goes dead is if someone physically disconnects the interface box on the side of the house. I slowly placed the receiver back in the cradle. She had isolated the battlefield. My son, David, was gone. The phone was dead, the roads were impassable, and the woman who wanted me dead was supposedly 3 hours away, giving her the perfect alibi. I was at the hospital with my mother, officer. I have the parking stub to prove it. Poor Arthur must have wandered outside in the confusion. You know how his mind wanders. I could hear her saying it. I could hear the fake sob in her voice. I gripped my cane tighter. The rubber handle felt solid, real. It was the only honest thing in the room. I needed to know for sure. I needed visual confirmation. I moved to the bedroom door and cracked it open. The hallway was dark. The house was freezing. She must have killed the furnace before she left. I crept into the hall. The floorboards groaned. I froze, holding my breath, listening. Nothing. I made my way to the guest room on the back side of the house. It had a view of the detached garage. I moved slower than I ever had in my life. Every step was a calculation. Don't drag the cane. Lift it. Place it. Shift weight. Repeat. I entered the guest room and approached the window. The garage stood silent in the snow, a dark shape against the white woods. I watched. 1 minute. 2 minutes. My eyes watered from the strain. Then I saw it. A tiny puff of gray vapor rose from the side vent of the garage. It was faint, instantly snatched away by the wind, but I saw it. It wasn't exhaust, the car wasn't running. It was a space heater, a propane catalytic heater. I had one on the shelf in there for when I used to tinker with engines in the winter. She was in there. She was keeping warm, huddled in the dark, watching the back of the house while I froze in the front. I stepped back from the window, my heart hammering a war drum against my ribs. For the last 6 months, I had been telling myself I was paranoid, that Jessica was just harsh, not malicious, that David was just busy, not negligent, that I was just getting old and difficult. I looked at that wisp of vapor again. That wasn't paranoia, that was proof. She was waiting for me to come outside. She was waiting for me to check the mail or the breaker box or to try and shovel the walk. She was waiting for the moment where she could help nature take its course. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something I hadn't felt since I was a foreman on the high voltage lines in the 70s. It was clarity. The fog of the sedatives was burning off, incinerated by the adrenaline. "Okay, Jessica," I whispered to the empty freezing room. "You want to play house?" I straightened my back. I ignored the screaming ache in my hips. "Let's see who knows this house better." I turned away from the window. I wasn't the patient anymore. The confused, stumbling old man she thought she left to die was gone. I was the prey, yes, but she forgot one thing about prey. Sometimes when you corner it, it bites back.
To understand why a man would risk electrocution to kill his daughter-in-law, you have to understand the cold. Cold is a slow poison. It doesn't kill you with a bang. It seeps into your joints, calcifies your will, and turns your own blood into sludge. It makes you stupid. It makes you desperate. And Jessica knew that. My mind drifted back 2 weeks. The strategy hadn't started with the blizzard. It started on a Tuesday, the day David picked up the extra shift at the logistics center. "I'll be back late, Dad," David had said, leaning over my recliner. He smelled of coffee and exhaustion. He adjusted the blanket over my legs, tucking it in tight. "Jessica's gonna make that pot roast you like. Just relax. You've been looking pale lately." "I'm fine, Dave," I'd lied. "Just old." "She's a saint for taking care of everything," he murmured, glancing toward the kitchen where Jessica was clattering pans, putting on a show of domestic industry. "I don't know what we'd do without her." "Yeah," I said, the word tasting like ash. A saint. He left at 6 a.m. I watched his taillights fade down the driveway. At 6:05 a.m., the furnace clicked off. It wasn't a cycle down, it was a hard stop. The blower fan whirred to a halt, and the silence rushed in to fill the vacuum. I waited. Usually the system cycles, 5 minutes off, 20 on. That's how I calibrated it 10 years ago. But 10 minutes passed, then 20. The residual heat in the house began to lift, sucked out through the drafty windows and the poorly insulated attic hatch. By 7 a.m., the air in the living room had a bite to it. I pulled the blanket higher, up to my chin. My fingers, resting on the arm of the chair, started to ache. It's a specific pain, a deep, throbbing ache in the knuckles that screams of barometric pressure and dropping mercury. At 7:30 a.m., Jessica walked in. She wasn't wearing her usual house clothes. She was wearing a thick, fleece-lined North Face vest over a heavy flannel shirt. She had thick wool socks on. She looked like she was dressed for a hike in October, not breakfast in a climate-controlled suburban home. "Good morning, Arthur," she chirped. She didn't look at me. She started dusting the mantel, moving Hummel figurines around with aggressive precision. "Jessica," I rasped. "The heat." She paused, feather duster in midair. She turned slowly, a look of practiced confusion on her face. "What about it?" "It's off. It's freezing in here." She laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. "Oh, Arthur, you're being dramatic. It's toasty. Look." She pointed to the thermostat on the wall. It was a new digital model she'd insisted on installing a month ago because the old analog wheel was an eyesore. It glowed a soft, reassuring blue. 70 degrees Fahrenheit. "It says 70, she said, her voice dropping to that patronizing tone one uses with a toddler. "Your blood thinners make you feel cold. Remember what Dr. Evans said? Poor circulation." "I don't care what the screen says," I said, my teeth starting to chatter. "I can see your breath." She smiled, tight and thin. "That's just dust, Arthur. Put on a sweater if you're having a spell. I'm actually sweating a little." She fanned herself with her hand for emphasis, then marched back to the kitchen. I sat there, trembling. Was I losing it? Was my body failing me that badly? I needed data. An electrician doesn't guess, he measures. I waited until I heard the shower running upstairs. I threw off the blanket, the cold air hitting me like a physical slap, and grabbed my cane. I shuffled over to the side table next to my recliner. Underneath the table, taped to the underside of the wood where it couldn't be seen unless you were crawling on the floor, was my backup. A Fluke 52-2 digital thermometer with a bead probe. I used to use it for checking overheating breaker panels. I pulled it loose and pressed the power button. The LCD screen flickered to life. I held the probe out into the stagnant air of the living room.
The numbers danced for a second, settling as the sensor acclimated. 52.4 degrees Fahrenheit. 52 degrees. Inside. I stared at the readout, rage warring with relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't senile. I was freezing to death in my own living room. She had rigged the wall thermostat. It was likely on a demo mode or simply disconnected from the HVAC relay, displaying a static 70 degrees while she manually cut the power to the furnace at the breaker or via a chaotic schedule on her phone app. I shoved the thermometer back into my pocket just as the water shut off upstairs. She came down 20 minutes later, smelling of lavender body wash. I was back under the blanket, shivering violently now. The cold had seeped into the cushions of the chair. "Lunchtime," she announced. "I'm cold," I managed to say. "Please." "You need to eat to warm up," she said, breezy and cheerful. She set a tray down on my lap. "A bowl of soup." "Chicken broth," she said. "Good for the soul." I looked at the bowl. It was pale yellow, translucent. No noodles, no chunks of chicken, no carrots, just liquid. I lifted the spoon, my hand shaking so bad the liquid sloshed over the side. I took a sip. It was lukewarm tap water. I could taste the chlorine. She had dissolved a single cheap bouillon cube in it, maybe half of one. It tasted like salty pool water. "It's water," I whispered. "It's a light broth, Arthur. You've been gaining weight. Heavy meals are bad for your heart." She sat on the sofa opposite me, pulled out her phone, and started scrolling. She was eating a turkey club sandwich. I could smell the bacon. I could smell the mayonnaise. "Jessica," I said, trying to steady my voice, "I need food. Real food." She didn't look up. "Eat your soup, Arthur. Don't be ungrateful. David works hard to put that food on the table." I watched her take a bite of the sandwich. A piece of lettuce fell onto her vest. She picked it off and ate it. I looked down at the salty water. My stomach cramped, a hollow, aching hunger that combined with the cold to create a profound sense of weakness. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just about saving money on the heating bill. This wasn't just lazy cooking. She was conditioning me. She was lowering my core temperature day by day. She was starving my muscles of glycogen. She was making me physically frail, mentally foggy, and utterly desperate for any source of warmth. Why? Because a freezing man doesn't think. A freezing man seeks heat. A freezing man sees a fire and runs towards it, even if he has to run through a minefield. She was preparing me. She was breaking me down so that when she finally set the trap, whatever it was going to be, I wouldn't have the energy to question it. I would just react. I drank the salty water. I let it slide down my throat, lukewarm and nauseating. "Drink it," I told myself. "Keep your strength. You're going to need it." I watched her finish her sandwich. She wiped her mouth with a napkin and looked at me, her eyes dead and flat like a shark's. "Still cold, Arthur?" she asked. "Yes," I said softly. "Freezing." "Good," she said, standing up to take my tray. "Bundling up builds character." She walked away, taking the warmth with her. I touched the thermometer in my pocket, my thumb running over the plastic casing. 52 degrees. The number was my anchor. It was the only truth in the house. I closed my eyes and started to plan. If she wanted a war of attrition, she was going to get one. But she made a mistake. She thought she was freezing an old man to death. She forgot that cold preserves things. It preserves the hate, and it preserves the resolve. I wasn't going to die shivering in this chair. I was going to survive, and I was going to turn up the heat. The most dangerous weapon an old man possesses isn't a shotgun or a cane. It is the assumption of incompetence. People look at wrinkles and see rust. They look at a trembling hand and see a lack of agency. They assume that because your body moves at half speed, your brain must be buffering too. Jessica relied on this. It was the cornerstone of her entire operation. She believed that I was a fading static signal, intermittent and easily ignored. I decided to lean into the static. It was Friday, 4 days before the blizzard hit. The temperature in the house was holding at a miserable 56 degrees. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-eaten piece of dry toast on the plate before me. Jessica was pacing the kitchen island, her phone clutched in her hand like a grenade with the pin pulled. She had been jumpy all morning, dropping spoons, slamming cabinet doors, checking the window every 30 seconds. I needed to know why. I reached up to my left ear and let out a loud, frustrated groan. I pulled the hearing aid from my ear canal. It let out a high-pitched screech of feedback, a sound I knew drove her crazy. "Damn thing," I muttered, shaking it roughly. "Battery's gone again. Dead as a doornail." I made a show of fiddling with the tiny battery compartment, my fingers clumsy and stiff. Then, with a sigh of defeat, I set the beige device on the placemat, right next to the toast. I tapped it twice, then slumped back in my chair, staring blankly at the wall, mouth slightly open. The universal posture of the checked-out geriatric. Jessica stopped pacing. She looked at me. She looked at the hearing aid on the table. "Arthur," she said, "normal volume." I didn't blink. I kept my gaze fixed on a spot of peeling paint on the far wall. "Arthur," she shouted, leaning over the counter. I continued to chew my toast, slowly, methodically, oblivious to her voice. She let out a breath, a sharp hiss of relief. She believed I was deaf to the world. She didn't know about the right ear. My hearing loss is asymmetrical. My left ear is trash, too many years next to heavy generators. But my right ear? It's damaged, sure, but with the high-fidelity Phonak aid David bought me last Christmas, I can hear a pin drop in the next room. I had kept the right aid in, concealed by the way I was leaning my head against my hand, my palm cupping the ear to rest, but actually acting as a parabolic reflector. I was live. Her phone buzzed. She snatched it up instantly. "What?" She snapped into the receiver. No pleasantries. She listened for a moment, her face draining of color. She turned her back to me, but she didn't leave the room immediately. She walked toward the laundry room door, just off the kitchen. It was her office, the place she went to hide from David. "I told you, don't call me on the landline," she hissed, lowering her voice. She stepped into the laundry room and pushed the door, but it didn't latch. It stayed cracked open about 2 inches. I took a bite of toast. I chewed. I visualized the layout. The laundry room was 10 feet away. The acoustics were good. Tile floors, hard surfaces. Her voice would bounce. "I can't just put it back, Mike," she whispered. The panic in her voice was raw, vibrating. "It's inventory. It's logged digitally. If the counts don't match the physical stock during the audit, the system flags it automatically." I stopped chewing. Inventory. Audit. Jessica was a pharmacy technician at the large hospital downtown. She managed the dispensation of controlled substances for the post-op ward. "Tuesday," she said. Her voice cracked. "The external auditors are coming Tuesday morning. They moved it up." She listened again. I could hear the tinny, aggressive cadence of a male voice on the other end, though I couldn't make out the words. "I know how much it is," she shrieked, then immediately clamped a hand over her mouth, glancing back through the crack in the door at me. I was busy inspecting a crumb on my thumb, looking utterly vacuous. She turned back to the phone, her voice dropping to a desperate growl. $200,000 in street value, Mike. It's not like I slipped a 20 out of the register. We moved 3 crates of OxyContin. If I get caught, it's not just fired, it's federal. It's 15 years. My blood ran cold. My daughter-in-law wasn't just cruel. She was a drug trafficker, and a bad one. She had gotten greedy, or she was being squeezed by someone named Mike. "I don't have the cash," she pleaded. "David doesn't have it. We're tapped. No, the house is in the old man's name. I can't mortgage it. No." Silence. She was listening to a threat. I could feel the tension radiating from the laundry room. "There is a way," she said suddenly. Her voice changed. The panic receded, replaced by something colder, something calculated. "The life insurance," she said. I froze. I forced my heart to keep a steady rhythm, terrified the monitor on my wrist, if I wore one, would betray me.
Arthur has a policy from the union, 500,000. David is the sole beneficiary, but I have power of attorney over the finances right now, while David is overwhelmed. Once the check clears, I can pay you the 200, cover the shortage before the books are finalized, and keep the rest. She paused. Yes, I checked the clauses. Suicide voids it, but natural causes, cardiac arrest, full payout, expedited review if there's a history of heart issues. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. And he has a history. He's brittle, Mike. One good shock, one bad fall, he's practically waiting to die. I stared at the hearing aid on the table. It looked like a dead beetle. Tuesday, she said firmly. The audit is Tuesday at 8 a.m. I'll have the claim filed by Monday night. You'll get your money. She hung up. I heard a long exhale, then the sound of her composing herself. The rustle of clothes, the fake smile being plastered back onto her face. She pushed the laundry door open and walked back into the kitchen. I didn't move. I didn't look at her. I waited until her shadow fell over the table. She reached out and touched my shoulder. I flinched, a genuine reaction, though I played it up as being startled. I looked up at her, blinking confusedly. "What?" I shouted, pointing to my ear. "Can't hear you." She smiled. It was the smile of a butcher looking at a prize hog. "I said," she enunciated, moving her lips in an exaggerated, mocking pantomime, "I'm going to make you some nice tea to warm you up." She patted my shoulder. "We need to take care of that heart of yours." I nodded dumbly. "Tea, that would be nice." She turned to the stove. I watched her back. I watched her hands as she reached for the kettle. They were steady now. The panic was gone. She had a plan. She had a deadline. Tuesday. Today was Friday. I had 72 hours. She wasn't just a bad person. She was a cornered animal. A cornered animal that owed $200,000 to a drug dealer named Mike. She needed my death to balance her ledger. She thought I was a deaf, senile obstacle. She thought I was just a line item in an insurance policy. I reached for the hearing aid on the table and jammed it back into my left ear. "Batteries seem okay now," I mumbled. "That's good, Arthur," she said, not turning around. "You don't want to miss anything." "No," I whispered to myself, my hand tightening around the handle of my cane. "I certainly don't." The motive was clear. The timeline was set. Now I just had to survive the execution method. And knowing Jessica, she wouldn't use a gun. That was too messy. She needed natural causes. She needed a heart attack. She needed terror or shock. I looked out the window. The gray clouds were gathering. The weatherman had predicted the storm of the century. She was going to use the cold. She was going to use the ice. I took a sip of the lukewarm water she called tea. It tasted like bitterness. "Come on then, Jessica," I thought. "Let's see who burns first." Saturday, 2 days before the deadline. The house was a mausoleum of cold air and unspoken violence. At exactly 6 p.m., the ritual began. I sat in the darkened living room, the only light coming from the street lamp outside filtering through the shears. I heard the kitchen tap running full blast. The sound was aggressive, water hitting the stainless steel sink with high pressure. Then the heavy thud of a 5-gallon bucket hitting the linoleum floor. Jessica walked past the living room archway. She wore her heavy coat and rubber muck boots. In her hand she carried the bucket, steam rising from the surface of the water. "Just going to rinse the porch, Arthur," she called out. Her voice was bright, artificial. "Mrs. Higgins' cat sprayed on the steps again. It smells awful. Can't have that." I didn't answer. I knew there was no cat. Mrs. Higgins moved to Florida 3 years ago. I watched her open the front door. A gust of Arctic air rushed in, carrying the scent of impending snow. The temperature outside was 17 degrees. She stepped out onto the concrete porch. I shifted in my chair to get a better angle through the gap in the curtains. She didn't scrub. She didn't use soap. She didn't use a brush.
She stood at the top of the 4 concrete steps that led down to the walkway and simply tipped the bucket. The water cascaded down the steps. It looked innocent enough, dark, wet streaks across the gray concrete. But in 17-degree weather, hot water does something dangerous. It doesn't just freeze, it flash freezes. The Mpemba effect, combined with the freezing concrete, turns the liquid into a sheet of glass within minutes. She paused, watching the water settle into the microscopic pores of the concrete. Then she went back inside, refilled the bucket, and did it again. She was painting the porch with death. She came back inside and locked the door, engaging the deadbolt with a loud clack. "All clean," she announced, stamping her boots on the mat. "Smells much better." She looked at me, her eyes scanning my seated form. She was checking my reaction. Was I suspicious? Was I senile enough to believe her hygiene excuse? I pulled the Afghan tighter around my shoulders. "Thank you, Jessica," I mumbled. "I hate that cat." She smirked. "I know you do, Arthur. Stay inside tonight. It might be a little slick until it dries." Until it dries. It wouldn't dry until May. She went upstairs to her room, leaving me alone with the trap. I waited 10 minutes, then hoisted myself up. I reached for the side table where I always hooked my cane. My hand grasped empty air. I frowned, looking down. The cane wasn't there. I checked the other side of the chair. Nothing. I checked the floor. Nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. That cane was my third leg. Without it, I was unstable, slow, and vulnerable. "Jessica!" I yelled, letting a crack of genuine fear into my voice. "What is it now?" she shouted from the top of the stairs. "My cane! It's gone!" She came down the stairs slowly, counting the steps. She stood in the doorway, hands on her hips. "Arthur, we talked about this," she sighed, shaking her head. "You left it in the basement yesterday, remember?" I haven't been in the basement in 6 months," I stammered. "I can't do the stairs." "You went down to look for your old tool belt," she lied, smoothly, effortlessly. "I told you it was a bad idea. You must have left it on the workbench." "I didn't," I insisted, though a flicker of doubt sparked in my brain. That's how gaslighting works. It doesn't convince you the lie is true. It convinces you that your memory is false. "Well, it's not up here," she said, turning away. "I'm not going down there to get it right now. I'm exhausted. You'll just have to be careful. Or maybe," she paused, looking back over her shoulder, "maybe we should get you a walker or a wheelchair, since you're having so much trouble walking." The threat was implicit. Give up your agency or fall. "I'll manage," I spat. "Suit yourself. Just don't go wandering around in the dark." She went back upstairs. I stood there, gripping the arm of the chair for balance. I knew exactly where the cane was. She had taken it while I was in the bathroom earlier. It was probably in the trunk of her car, or thrown in the snow. She was removing my stabilizers. I looked back at the window. The porch light was off, but the street lamp illuminated the work she had done. The steps didn't look icy. They just looked wet, shiny, darker than the surrounding concrete. That's the beauty of black ice. It camouflages itself. It waits. If I walked out that door tomorrow morning to get the mail, which she would undoubtedly ask me to do, I would hit that first step and launch. But as I stared at the glistening trap, the electrician in me started to troubleshoot. A fall is dangerous, yes. At 72, a broken hip is a sentence to a slow decline. Pneumonia, bed sores, sepsis. It kills you in 6 months. But Jessica didn't have 6 months. She had until Tuesday. She needed me dead now. If I slipped on that ice, I'd tumble down 4 steps. I'd break bones. I'd be in agony. I'd scream. Neighbors might hear. The mailman might see. An ambulance would come. I'd survive the fall, most likely. Jessica is a medical professional. She knows anatomy. She knows physics. She knows that a fall from 4 feet isn't a guaranteed kill. It's a gamble, and Jessica doesn't gamble. She cheats.
So why the ice? The ice wasn't the kill shot. The ice was the mechanism. You use ice to remove friction. You use ice to make a body travel from point A to point B with momentum and without control. She wanted me to slide, but slide into what? I closed my eyes and visualized the porch. 4 steps down, iron railings on both sides. The railing on the left is loose, the bolts rusted out years ago. The railing on the right is solid, anchored deep into the concrete. If I slip, my instinct, my survival reflex, will be to grab the rail. My right hand, the dominant hand, the hand that would reach out blindly as my feet flew out from under me. I would grab the right-hand rail to arrest my fall. I opened my eyes. The rail. Why did she spend so much time cleaning near the base of the railing? The realization hit me. The ice ensures I can't stand. It ensures I must grab the metal. It forces a connection between my body and that iron bar. If that bar is just cold iron, I bruise my shoulder. But if that bar is something else, I remembered the voltage tester in my toolbox. I remembered the schematic of the house wiring. The porch light circuit runs through a conduit right next to the base of that railing. She hid my cane to make me unstable. She iced the porch to make me fall. She needs me to grab the rail. She wasn't trying to break my bones. She was trying to complete a circuit. I leaned against the wall, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm. Smart girl, I whispered into the darkness. Evil, but smart. She was building an electric chair out of my own front porch, and she was counting on the fact that by the time the snow melted and the coroner arrived, the evidence would have shorted out or looked like a frantic attempt by a dying man to steady himself. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but not from the cold this time. She wanted me to grab the rail? Fine. I'd make sure someone grabbed the rail. But first, I had to survive the night, and I had to find a weapon. I couldn't walk well without my cane, so I did what any good tradesman does when he's missing a tool. I improvised. I moved to the fireplace. The heavy iron poker sat in the stand. It was about the same length as my cane. Heavier, colder, but it would hold my weight. I gripped the iron handle. It felt like a sword. Phase 1 complete, I murmured. Now let's see what you've done with the wiring.
Sunday morning arrived with the heavy, grayscale oppressiveness of a wool blanket pulled over the sun. The sky wasn't just cloudy, it was a bruising shade of purple-gray, the kind that sailors and farmers know means trouble. The air pressure was dropping so fast I could feel it in my replaced knee. The first domino fell at breakfast. David was pacing the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear, his other hand raking through his thinning hair. "I don't understand," he was saying. "The regional conference in Cleveland wasn't scheduled until March. Why the sudden push?" I sat at the table, nursing a cup of black coffee that I had brewed myself before Jessica woke up. It was the only thing I trusted. David listened, nodding aggressively at the empty air. "Okay, yeah, no, I get it. If corporate says it's mandatory, it's mandatory. The timing is terrible with the storm coming." He hung up and looked at Jessica, who was standing by the sink, washing dishes with her back to us. "They need me in Cleveland," David said, his voice thick with guilt. "Emergency strategy meeting regarding the supply chain audit, effective immediately. I have to drive up tonight to beat the snow." Jessica turned around. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. She widened her eyes, brought a soapy hand to her chest, and let her mouth drop open just enough to suggest shock, but not enough to look ugly. "Oh, David," she said, "but the roads. Are you sure?" "I have to," he sighed, looking at me. "Dad, I'm sorry. I hate leaving you when the weather is like this."
I looked at David, my son. He has my chin, but his mother's soft heart. He trusts people. He assumes that the world operates on the same frequency of honesty that he does. "I'll be fine, Dave," I said. "It's just snow. I've lived through blizzards before you were born." "Jessica will be here," David said, reassuring himself more than me. "Actually," Jessica interjected softly. She walked over to him, wiping her hands on a towel. "David, honey, I didn't want to add to your stress, but Mom called this morning." David's face fell. "Is she okay?" "She fell again," Jessica lied. The fluency of it was terrifying. "The neighbor found her. She's at St. Luke's. They're doing hip surgery tomorrow morning. I really need to go be with her. You know how she gets with anesthesia." I watched them. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She had manufactured a crisis for David, likely by accessing his email and sending a spoofed scheduling update from corporate to get him out of the house. And now she was manufacturing an exit for herself. She wanted the house empty. She wanted the stage cleared. "Go," David said, hugging her. "Family comes first. Dad will be okay for a couple of days. He's got the generator if the power goes out. I'll make sure he's set up before I leave," Jessica promised, burying her face in his neck. Over his shoulder, her eyes met mine. They were blank, predatory. David left at noon. I watched his sedan disappear down the driveway, the first flakes of snow beginning to swirl in his wake. "Drive safe, son," I whispered. As soon as he was gone, the temperature in the house seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jessica stopped pretending. She didn't look at me. She moved through the house with efficient, militaristic speed. She spent the afternoon prepping. She moved things. She locked the basement door and pocketed the key. She checked the windows. At 4 p.m., the snow began in earnest, big, heavy flakes that stuck instantly to the frozen ground. At 4:30 p.m., Jessica came into the living room. She was dressed for travel. Heavy wool coat, scarf, leather gloves. She was pulling a rolling suitcase. I was sitting in my recliner, gripping the iron poker I had hidden under the throw blanket. "I'm leaving now, Arthur," she said. She stood over me, looming. "In this?" I gestured to the window. "You'll slide off the road." "I have four-wheel drive," she said dismissively, "and I have to get to my mother." She leaned in close. The smell of her perfume, something floral and cloying, made my stomach turn. "Now listen to me," she said, her voice dropping to a low, hard register. "Do not go outside. The wind chill is dangerous. If you fall, no one is coming to help you. The phones might go down. David is in Cleveland. I am 3 hours away. You are on your own." "I know," I said. "I'll stay right here." "Good." She leaned down and pressed her lips to my forehead. It was a Judas kiss. Her lips were dry and cold. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was a final check of the merchandise. Pulse, active, temperature, warm, status, ready for disposal. "There's soup in the fridge," she said, straightening up. "Don't burn the house down." She turned and walked to the front door. She opened it, and the wind howled, a banshee shriek that filled the hallway. "Bye, Arthur," she called out. She stepped out and slammed the door. Wham! I heard the deadbolt slide home. She had locked me in, or rather, she had locked the world out. I sat perfectly still. This was the moment. The sequence of sounds that followed would tell me everything. I closed my eyes and focused. I tuned out the wind. I tuned out the hum of the refrigerator. I became a recording device. Sound 1, the crunch of boots on snow, heavy, deliberate steps moving away from the porch. Sound 2, the click of a car door handle, the heavy thud of the SUV door closing. I waited. I waited for the high-pitched whine of the starter motor. I waited for the roar of the V6 engine. I waited for the revving, the shifting of gears. Silence. I frowned. Maybe she was checking her phone? 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Then a different sound. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the slow, rhythmic compression of tires on snow. But it was too quiet. There was no engine noise, no exhaust rumble. She had released the parking brake. My driveway has a slight grade, a gentle 2-degree slope that runs from the parking pad near the house down toward the detached garage in the turnaround bay. She was rolling the car. If she started the engine, the vibration would travel through the ground. I would hear it. The neighbors might hear it. But a car rolling in neutral? That's a phantom. I heard the tires crunch further away, fading into the wind. Then the distinct, hollow boom of the garage door closing. She hadn't driven down the driveway to the street. She had rolled the car 50 feet backward into the detached garage and closed the door. She was still here. I opened my eyes and looked at the clock. 4:42 p.m. The sun was setting. The storm was intensifying, and my killer was camped out in my backyard, probably sitting in the dark of the garage with a thermos and a space heater, waiting for the lights to go out. She wanted me to think I was abandoned. She wanted me to panic when the power failed and rush out to check the breaker box on the side of the garage. I stood up, using the poker for support. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. Empty. White. To the casual observer, she was gone. "Okay," I whispered, my heart rate steadying into a cold, hard rhythm. "You didn't leave." I turned back to the silent house. "That means I don't have to wait for the police to catch you." I went to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept my electrical tools. I took out my voltage tester. I took out a roll of electrical tape. I took out a pair of heavy rubber-soled work boots I had hidden in the pantry weeks ago. If she was in the garage, she controlled the main breaker panel for the property. She could cut the power whenever she wanted. But she made a mistake. She forgot that I wired that garage in 1982. She forgot that there is a sub-panel in the basement that feeds the external security lights. And she forgot that an electrician is never truly unarmed in his own home. I checked the battery on the voltage tester. It beeped, a cheerful red LED chirp. David is safe, I said to myself. You are not. I moved toward the back door. It was time to verify the trap. It was time to find the copper snake she had hidden in the snow. The game had changed. It wasn't hide and seek anymore. It was king of the hill. And I had the high ground.
The investigation. I waited 60 minutes. In the world of electrical troubleshooting, patience isn't a virtue. It's a safety protocol. You wait for capacitors to discharge. You wait for thermal overloads to cool. And in this case, you wait for the enemy to get comfortable. By 5:45 p.m., the sun was gone. The blizzard had reduced visibility to 0. The wind was screaming around the eaves of the house, a perfect acoustic mask for what I needed to do. I sat on the floor of the kitchen, pulling on my heavy boots. My hands were stiff, but the adrenaline acted like a lubricant. I grabbed my coat, the heavy Carhartt I used to wear on job sites, and zipped it to my chin. I pulled a black knit cap low over my ears. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the tool that would save my life. My Fluke 1AC2 non-contact voltage tester. We call it a widow stick in the trade. It glows red and chirps when it detects a live current. It doesn't lie. I didn't go out the front door. That was the kill zone. If Jessica was watching from the garage, her eyes would be fixed on that porch, waiting for the old man to stumble out. I went to the back door, the one leading to the small patio that faces the woods, completely blind to the garage. I unlocked the deadbolt. I turned the handle slowly. The wind caught the door and tried to rip it from my grip, but I held it fast, slipping through the crack and pulling it shut behind me. The cold hit me like a hammer. It was breathtaking, a physical weight pressing against my chest. The snow was already calf-deep. I didn't stand up. I crouched, keeping my profile low against the foundation of the house. I wasn't Arthur the retiree anymore. I was an apprentice again, crawling through a crawl space, terrified of hitting a live wire in the dark. I moved along the perimeter of the house, trudging through the drifts. The wind bit at my exposed skin, but I focused on the rhythm of my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I reached the corner of the house. Around this bend was the front porch. The garage was 50 yards to my left, set back. If I stayed low, the snowbanks formed by the wind against the shrubs would hide me. I peeked around the corner. The front porch was eerie. The street lamp cast a sickly yellow glow over the scene, the washed steps or a sheet of black glass reflecting the light. And then I saw it. It was subtle. To a layman, it would have been invisible, but I've spent 40 years looking for faults in the chaotic mess of construction sites. My eyes are drawn to irregularities. The porch light, an old brass carriage lantern mounted by the door, was slightly askew. The caulk line around the base was broken. I narrowed my eyes, squinting against the stinging snow. Running from the bottom of the fixture, tucked neatly into the J-channel of the vinyl siding, was a dark line, a wire. It ran down the wall, disappearing into the snowdrift that had piled up against the porch foundation. I crept closer, moving on my hands and knees now. The snow soaked through my pants, freezing my knees, but I didn't care. I needed to see the connection point. I reached the side of the porch, just below the iron railing. I brushed away a layer of fresh powder with a gloved hand, moving with the delicacy of an archaeologist. There it was, the copper snake. It was a length of 12-gauge solid copper wire, black insulation. She had stripped the end, exposing about 6 inches of bare, gleaming copper. The wire came up from the snow, invisible against the black iron of the railing's bottom post. She had wrapped the bare copper tightly around the mounting bolt of the handrail. I stared at it, a mix of horror and professional appreciation churning in my gut. It was a hot leg bypass. She had likely tapped into the switched phase of the porch light. When the switch inside was flipped on, 120 volts of alternating current would travel down that wire, energize the iron railing, and turn the safety device into a lethal conductor. The railing wasn't grounded properly. I knew that because I'd meant to fix the grounding rod connection last summer. It was isolated by the concrete. If I stood on that wet, icy concrete, which acted as a perfect ground reference, and grabbed that energized rail, zap. The muscles in my hand would contract instantly, locking my grip onto the rail. I wouldn't be able to let go. The current would traverse my chest to get to the ground. Ventricular fibrillation would set in within seconds. I would stand there, frozen, shaking while my heart turned into a quivering bag of worms. I pulled the voltage tester from my pocket. I needed to know if it was live now. I held the tip of the tester near the wire, hovering just an inch away. Nothing. No light. No beep. The circuit was cold. Of course. The porch light was off. The switch inside was off. She hadn't armed the trap yet. She was waiting for me to be outside, or waiting for night to fully settle so the light and the trap would seem natural. Or maybe she was waiting to cut the main power, leaving only this circuit active. No, that would require rewiring the panel. That was beyond her skill level. Unless I traced the wire back up with my eyes. The porch light bulb was screwed in. If she flipped the switch, the light would come on and the rail would go hot. It was crude. It was nasty. But it was brilliant. The black ice guarantees the slip. The slip guarantees the grab. The grab guarantees the shock. You didn't just want me to fall, I whispered, my breath booming in the dark. You wanted to cook me. I lowered my hand. I had seen enough. I backed away, retracing my crawl through the snow, careful not to disturb the drift covering the wire. I had to leave it exactly as I found it. If I cut the wire now, she'd see the light not working, or she'd come to check and see the cut. She'd know I was onto her. She'd come at me with something else, a knife, a tire iron, fire. I needed her to think the trap was still viable. I needed her to think she was the hunter. I made it back to the rear of the house, my body shivering violently now. I slipped inside the back door and locked it, leaning against the wood, gasping for air. My hands were shaking, but the voltage tester was still gripped tight in my fist. I had the evidence. I knew the method. Now I just had to figure out the math. 120 volts, 15 amps. I looked at the breaker panel in the laundry room hallway. If I could trick her, if I could reverse the polarity. No, that's Hollywood nonsense. The reality was simpler. She was waiting for me to complete the circuit. I peeled off my wet gloves. My eyes hardened. "Okay, Jessica," I said to the empty house. "You rigged the rail, but you forgot to check the breaker." I walked toward the kitchen. I needed to see the schematic in my head. I needed to calculate the load. Because if she wanted to play with electricity, she was about to learn the first rule of the trade. Current follows the path of least resistance. And tonight, I wasn't going to be the resistor. She was. The science. Before I retreated into the warmth of the house, I had one last inspection to make. I stayed low, hugging the brickwork, and shimmied toward the utility cluster on the south wall. This was the service entrance, where the main feed from the street hit the meter and the exterior disconnect. I pulled a small screwdriver from my pocket. I never leave a room without a tool, and pried open the gray metal cover of the sub-panel I'd installed in '05 to handle the outdoor landscaping lights. The wind tried to rip the door from my hand, but I held it steady, shining my penlight into the guts of the box. There it was, breaker number 4, porch/front. It was modified. A thick strip of silver duct tape was wrapped around the toggle switch, binding it firmly in the on position. I stared at it, and a grim smile cracked my frozen lips. Jessica, you dangerous, educated fool. Any first-year apprentice knows that modern circuit breakers are trip-free. You can tape the handle, glue it, or hold it down with your thumb. If the current exceeds the rating, the internal mechanism will still trip. The handle will stay up, but the circuit will open. But Jessica isn't an apprentice. She's a pharmacist. She thinks in terms of chemistry, not mechanics. She thinks that if you tape a switch on, it stays on. However, as I leaned closer, I saw the real danger. She hadn't just taped it. She had swapped it. The breaker that used to be there was a 15-amp safety switch designed to cut the power in a split second if it detected a problem. The breaker sitting there now was a standard black square D single pole, and looking at the white stamp on the handle, 30A. She had replaced a sensitive safety device with a brute. She had overfused the circuit. She ensured that if I grabbed that rail, the breaker wouldn't care. To a 30-amp breaker, my dying body would look just like a heavy-duty appliance. It wouldn't trip. It would just feed me current until I cooked. I closed the panel, wiped my fingerprints from the metal, and crawled back to the rear door. Inside, I locked the deadbolt and collapsed into the kitchen chair. I was shivering violently, hypothermia nipping at my extremities, but I didn't need a calculator to know the math. In the trade, we have a name for what she set up: the death grip. See, electricity does something nasty to the human body. When alternating current hits your hand, it forces your muscles to contract instantly. It overrides your brain. If I slipped on that ice and grabbed that rail with my palm, I wouldn't be able to let go. My hand would lock onto the metal with the force of a hydraulic vise. I would hang there, buzzing, unable to scream as my diaphragm paralyzed, waiting for my heart to turn into a quivering mess. That's the beauty of her trap. She didn't need high voltage. She just needed me to be wet, cold, and holding on tight. And the police? I closed my eyes and pictured the autopsy.
I am a 72-year-old man with a documented history of hypertension. They'd find an old man at the bottom of icy stairs. A slip and fall, they'd call it. Tragic accident. They wouldn't look for the wire hidden in the snow. They wouldn't check the amperage on the breaker outside. It was elegant. It was evil. It relied on the bias of the observer. They would see old man plus snow plus cardiac condition equals natural tragedy. She had done her homework. She knew about the cardiac arrest clause in the insurance policy. She knew that cold masks the time of death, but she made one fatal error in her calculations. She calculated the resistance of my skin. She calculated the payout of the policy. She forgot to calculate the resistance of my will. I stood up. The dizziness was gone. The cold was gone. I felt a strange vibrating energy in my core. I wasn't going to just avoid the trap. I wasn't going to just call the police and hope they believed me. I looked at the schematic of the house wiring in my mind's eye. She was in the garage, and the garage has its own rules. I walked to the thermostat and cranked it all the way up, 80 degrees. I wanted the house hot. I wanted to be sweating, because when the end game came, I needed to be warm, loose, and fast. I sat back down in the recliner facing the window. I picked up my voltage tester and spun it between my fingers like a revolver. Your science is solid, Jessica, but you're working with AC, alternating current. It flows both ways, and it was about time the current flowed back to the source.
The waiting game. The urge to cut the wire was a physical itch. It sat in my fingertips, demanding that I take my side cutters and sever that copper snake, rendering her trap useless. It would be safe. It would be logical, but it would be a mistake. If I cut the wire, the game changes. Jessica comes out of the garage, sees the severed connection, and realizes the senile old man is actually a lucid, armed combatant. She realizes she has lost the element of surprise, and a cornered animal that has lost its trap doesn't surrender, it attacks. She would come through that front door with a tire iron, or she would set fire to the house. No, I couldn't disarm the trap. I had to let her believe it was still live. I had to let her believe she was still the puppet master. I retreated inside, closing the back door softly. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I moved to the front door. I checked the lock. Click. Then I walked to the hallway thermostat. For 2 weeks, this small plastic box had been an instrument of my torture. It had been the governor of my misery, locked at a fake 70 degrees while the house hovered near freezing. I looked at the digital display. It read 62 degrees Fahrenheit. The house was chilling down rapidly with the sun gone. I pressed the override button. I held the up arrow. 63, 64, 65. I didn't stop. 70, 72, 75. I pushed it all the way to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I pressed hold. Somewhere in the basement, the massive old furnace, a beast I had installed in the 90s, woke up. It rumbled like a waking dragon. The burners ignited with a whoomph that I could feel through the floorboards. The blower motor kicked in, forcing hot, dry air through the vents. The sound was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I went to the kitchen. I didn't make soup. I didn't make toast. I filled the electric kettle and set it to boil. When it clicked off, I poured the scalding water into my largest mug, a world's greatest grandpa mug that David had given me a decade ago. I dropped 2 bags of Earl Grey into it. I didn't add milk. I wanted the heat. I walked into the living room. The furnace was roaring now. The vents were ticking and pinging as the metal ductwork expanded, reacting to the sudden influx of heat. I approached the bay window. This was the stage. I pulled the sheer curtains back just enough. The street lamp outside was struggling against the blizzard, creating a cone of illuminated snow. Beyond that light, the darkness was absolute. But I knew where the garage was. I knew the line of sight. If she was looking through the side window of the garage, she would see into my living room. She would see the lamp I had left on by the recliner. I sat down. I didn't huddle. I didn't wrap myself in the Afghan. I threw the blanket onto the floor. I sat in my flannel shirt, the top button undone. I held the steaming mug of tea with both hands, lifting it to my lips in a slow, deliberate motion. I blew on the steam, letting it billow up around my face. I was broadcasting a message. I am warm. I am comfortable. I am not coming outside. Now the siege began. A siege is not a battle of weapons. It is a battle of resources. And in this blizzard, the only resource that mattered was BTUs. I closed my eyes and pictured the detached garage. I built it in 1982. It's a sturdy structure, framed with 2x4s and sided with vinyl, but it is a shell. There was no insulation in the walls. The floor is a slab of poured concrete that sucks the heat out of anything that touches it. The wind cuts through the gaps in the overhead door. Jessica had been out there since 4:30 p.m. It was now nearing 8 p.m. The temperature outside was 12 degrees and dropping. She likely had a small propane heater, the Mr. Heater portable unit I kept on the shelf. It runs on those little 1-pound green camping cylinders. On a high setting, one cylinder lasts about 3 hours. If she brought 2, she was okay until 10 p.m. If she brought 1, she was running on fumes right now. I took a sip of tea. It burned my tongue, a sharp, grounding pain. I looked out the window. The snow was blowing sideways. "How are those toes, Jessica?" I whispered.
I knew the progression of hypothermia. I'd seen it on job sites in the dead of winter when apprentices didn't dress right. First, the shivering. Violent, uncontrollable shaking as the body tries to generate heat. That would have started an hour ago. Then the loss of fine motor skills. Her fingers would be stiff, clumsy. Using her phone would be difficult. Then comes the umbles, stumbles, mumbles, fumbles. The brain starts to prioritize the core organs. It pulls blood from the extremities. Her feet would be blocks of ice in those rubber boots. Her nose and ears would be burning with frost nip. And all the while, she has to watch me. She has to watch the senile old man sitting in his favorite chair, basking in the golden light of a lamp, sipping tea, safe and warm. It must be driving her insane. The plan required me to come outside. I was supposed to panic when the house got cold, which she assumed it was, or when the power went out, which she hadn't cut yet. I was supposed to try to flee, but I wasn't fleeing. I was nesting. The furnace cycled off, having reached the set temperature. The house was a tropical 80 degrees. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead. It felt glorious. I stood up and stretched. I made sure to do it slowly, facing the window. I walked to the kitchen, refilled my mug, and walked back. I was taunting her with my vitality.
Time crawled. 8:30 p.m. The wind rattled the panes. The snow was piling up on the sill. I wondered what she was thinking. Was she regretting it? No. People like Jessica don't regret the evil they do. They only regret the difficulty of its execution. She wasn't thinking, I shouldn't be trying to kill Arthur. She was thinking, why won't that old bastard just die? She was calculating the audit on Tuesday. The clock was ticking louder for her than it was for me. She needed this done tonight. If I didn't die tonight, she couldn't file the claim tomorrow. If she couldn't file the claim, she couldn't pay Mike. Desperation is a powerful fuel, but it burns dirty. It makes you rash. I checked my watch. 9:15 p.m. Suddenly, the light in the room flickered. It wasn't a storm flicker. A storm flicker is erratic, on, off, dim, bright. This was a sharp, deliberate blink. I set my mug down. My pulse quickened. She was making a move. The cold in the garage must have become unbearable. The propane must have run out. She realized that I wasn't coming out for the mail. I wasn't coming out to check the weather. I was dug in like a tick. She needed to flush me out. I watched the street lamp outside. It remained steady. The grid was fine. The neighborhood had power. But inside, my lamp flickered again. She was at the main disconnect. The detached garage has a sub-panel, but the main feed for the property comes from the pole to the meter on the side of the house, then to the main panel in the basement. Wait, if she was in the garage, she couldn't cut the house power from there. The garage is fed by the house, not the other way around. Unless, I remembered the renovation in 2010. We buried the lines. There is a disconnect box on the exterior wall of the garage, near where the conduit enters the trench. It was a code requirement, an emergency shutoff for the outbuilding. But there is also the main meter on the house. If she wanted to kill the lights in the house, she had to leave the garage. She had to trudge through 50 yards of blizzard, come to the side of the house, and pull the meter or flip the external main. I pressed my face to the glass, shielding my eyes to see into the dark. A shadow detached itself from the garage. It was a hunched, bulky shape, moving slowly, jerkily. She was coming. She was fighting through thigh-deep snow. The wind was knocking her sideways. I could see the beam of a flashlight cutting through the white chaos, swinging wildly. She wasn't coming to the front door. She was heading for the side of the house, to the utility cluster. She was going to kill the power. She thought that plunging the house into darkness and cutting the furnace would force me out. She thought that if the heat died, the frail old man would panic and try to leave to go to a neighbor's house. And to leave, I would have to use the front door. I would have to use the ramp. I would have to grab the rail. I sat back in my chair. "Come on, Jessica," I whispered. "Cut the line." I wasn't afraid of the dark. I had a flashlight in my pocket. I had a plan. And she was about to find out that cutting the power to the house doesn't cut the power to the trap, because of the way I wired it. The porch light circuit, the one she tapped into, it wasn't on the main lighting bus. When I upgraded the service, I put the exterior security lighting, including the porch, on a separate subfeed that bypasses the main household disconnect, specifically so that if the main breaker tripped during a storm, the security lights would stay on, provided the grid was up. It was a quirk of my own design, a redundant safety feature. If she pulled the main disconnect handle on the side of the house, the TV would die, the furnace would die, the kitchen lights would die. But the porch light? That circuit would stay hot. She was about to plunge me into darkness, thinking she was terrifying me. In reality, she was setting the stage for her own execution. I watched the flashlight beam disappear around the corner of the house. I took one last sip of tea. "Lights out," I said. And then the world went black. The darkness was absolute, but the silence was worse. When the power cut, the house didn't just turn off. It died. The rhythmic, comforting thrum of the furnace blower, a sound that had been the heartbeat of the home for the last 2 hours, ceased instantly. The refrigerator in the kitchen stopped its compressor cycle with a shuddering rattle. The hum of the digital clocks, the faint buzz of the transformers in the wall chargers, all of it vanished. I sat in the pitch-black living room, the world's greatest grandpa mug still warm in my hands. My eyes adjusted slowly. The room was illuminated only by the faint, ghostly backscatter of the street lamp outside, filtering through the blizzard and the sheer curtains. The snow acted as a reflector, casting a pale, blue-gray luminescence across the furniture. I didn't move. I didn't gasp. I didn't reach for my phone. I sat there and listened to the wind howl against the siding, a sound that suddenly felt much closer, much more intimate, now that the mechanical noises of the 21st century were gone. "So that's how we're playing it," I whispered. My voice sounded loud in the dead room. I checked my watch, angling the face toward the window to catch the faint light. 9:18 p.m. She had lasted nearly 5 hours before breaking. That was impressive, actually. I had estimated 4. The cold is a brutal interrogator. It strips away patience and logic layer by layer. By now, Jessica wasn't thinking about the audit or the insurance money. She was thinking about the pain in her toes, the burning in her ears, and the infuriating warmth she imagined I was enjoying.
She had pulled the main disconnect on the side of the house. It was the only move she had left. She couldn't storm the house. That would leave marks. And she needed this to look like an accident. She needed me to come out. She needed to flush the rabbit from the hole. She assumed that when the lights went out and the furnace died, the confused old man would panic. She assumed I would worry about the pipes freezing. She assumed I would try to go to the neighbors, or at least come out to check the breaker box. I took a sip of tea. It was still hot. The air in the house was a stifling 80 degrees. The thermal mass of the plaster walls, the furniture, and the floorboards held the heat like a battery. It would take hours for this house to cool down to a level that was even uncomfortable, let alone dangerous. I was safe. She was the one dying of exposure. But I couldn't just sit here. The game had entered the final phase. If I didn't react, she might escalate to something I couldn't control, like breaking a window or starting a fire in the garage to warm herself. I needed to keep her focused on the front door. I stood up, moving slowly. My knees ached, but the heat had loosened them up. I felt strong. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my flashlight, a heavy aluminum-bodied mag light. I didn't turn it on yet. I navigated the living room by memory, my feet knowing exactly where the rug ended and the hardwood began. I moved to the front hallway. This was the critical juncture. The success of her trap and my counter-trap hinged on a single anomaly in the wiring code. When Jessica pulled the main disconnect outside, she physically separated the house's main breaker panel from the grid. The kitchen, the bedrooms, the furnace, all dead. However, the porch light circuit was different. Back in '98, when I installed the exterior security lighting, I had wired it into a separate sub-panel fed by a line-side tap. It was a setup used for emergency circuits designed to remain active even if the main house breaker tripped or was pulled for maintenance. It was technically a gray area in the building code back then, and definitely a violation now, but I had never changed it. Jessica, for all her cunning, wasn't an electrician. She saw a big handle on the side of the house labeled main disconnect and assumed it killed everything. She didn't know that she had left the weapon live. I approached the front door. I could feel the cold radiating from the glass of the storm door, attacking the warm air of the hallway. I looked at the switch on the wall, a standard toggle switch. If I flipped that switch up, the circuit would close. The electricity would flow from the grid, bypass the dead main panel, travel through the junction box, and hit the porch light fixture. And from there, it would travel down the copper snake she had hidden in the snow, energizing the iron rail. I reached out and rested my finger on the switch. Not yet, I told myself. She needs to see the bait. I moved to the side light window, the narrow strip of glass next to the door. I peered out. The blizzard was a white wall. The wind was whipping the snow into frenzied spirals. But movement caught my eye. A shadow. It was near the corner of the house, by the hydrangea bushes, a dark, hulking shape struggling against the wind. She was watching. She had circled back from the utility box and was positioning herself to witness the result of her handiwork. She wanted to see the lights go out and then see me stumble out the door. She was shivering. Even from here, 20 feet away through a blizzard, I could see the jerky, spasmodic movements of her body. She was hugging herself, stamping her feet. She was in the late stages of moderate hypothermia. Her judgment would be shot. She was running on lizard brain instinct now. Action, reaction, kill, warmth. I stepped back from the window. It was time to give her what she wanted. I clicked my flashlight on. The beam cut through the darkness of the hallway, a stark white shaft of light. I made sure to wave it around erratically, mimicking the shaky, panicked movements of a frightened senior citizen. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice cracking perfectly. "The power! Is anyone there?" I swung the beam across the front door, letting it flare against the glass so she would see it from outside. I stomped my feet on the floorboards, creating a heavy, clumsy vibration. "David? Jessica?" I waited for a response. The wind howled in answer. I moved closer to the door. I wanted her to see the flashlight beam dancing near the lock. I wanted her to think, he's coming out. He's coming to check the fuse box. I could imagine her out there,
her frozen lips stretching into a rictus of anticipation. The adrenaline would be flooding her system, warming her momentarily. She would be thinking that it was finally over. I reached for the deadbolt. I unlocked it with a loud, metallic clack, then the knob lock. Click. I opened the heavy wooden door, leaving only the glass storm door between me and the storm. The cold air rushed in through the gap, but the storm door was frozen shut, rimmed with ice. I pushed against it, feigning weakness. "Damn it!" I yelled, loud enough for her to hear through the glass. "Stuck!" I shone the flashlight through the glass, illuminating the porch. The beam hit the iron railing. It hit the snow-covered steps, and it hit the hidden wire. To me, it was glaringly obvious, a black line against the white snow. But to her, it was invisible. I acted confused. I swept the light back and forth. "Is the street out?" I muttered, performing for my audience of one. I reached for the porch light switch. This was the moment of truth. If I flipped this switch and the light didn't come on, my theory about the wiring was wrong. The trap was dead. I would have to go to plan B, the tire iron. But if the light came on, I took a deep breath. "Let's see," I whispered. I flipped the switch up. Click. Outside, the brass carriage lantern flared to life. A bright, warm yellow glow flooded the porch. It worked. The bypass was active. And more importantly, the trap was armed. The moment that bulb lit up, 120 volts of electricity surged down the hidden copper wire and energized the iron railing. That cold metal bar was now a live conductor, humming with lethal potential, waiting for a path to ground. I saw the shadow in the bushes freeze. She stopped shivering for a second. She saw the light. She knew the rail was hot. She watched me through the glass. I was standing in the open doorway, flashlight in hand, looking confused and frail. I put my hand on the handle of the storm door. I pushed again. It gave way slightly, the ice cracking. I was teasing her. I was the fish nibbling at the hook. But I wasn't going to bite. Not yet. I needed her to come closer. I needed her to be right at the foot of the stairs when the finale happened. I let go of the door handle and stepped back, shaking my head. I hugged my chest, acting as if the draft was too much. "Too cold," I yelled. "I need a coat." I slammed the inner wooden door shut, cutting off her view. I locked it again. Clack. I leaned my forehead against the wood, breathing hard. My heart was racing, not from fear, but from the thrill of the execution. I had verified the weapon. I had baited the target. Now I had to set the stage for the swap. I looked down at the bag of flour I had staged near the coat rack earlier in the day. A 10-pound bag of King Arthur flour. Dead weight. I looked at my heavy wool coat. I looked at the flashlight. "Okay, Arthur," I said to the darkness. "Time to die." I turned and headed for the kitchen to grab the final prop, the heavy cast-iron skillet. She wanted a slip. She wanted a thud. She wanted a scream. I was going to give her a performance she would take to her grave. The stage was set. The lighting was perfect. A single harsh beam from the porch lantern cutting through the swirling snow, illuminating the icy steps and the deadly iron rail. The audience of one was waiting in the shadows. Now I needed to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I stood in the dark hallway, the heat from the furnace slowly bleeding away into the uninsulated attic, though the air was still thick and warm compared to the hellscape outside. I looked at my props. First, the heavy wool coat. I put it on, buttoning it unevenly. I wanted to look disheveled, frantic, a man who dressed in the dark, a man in a panic. Second, the flashlight. I kept it in my hand, but I loosened my grip. It needed to fall naturally. Third, the body double. I reached down and hoisted the 10-pound bag of King Arthur flour I had taken from the pantry. It was dense, wrapped in paper and plastic. When dropped from shoulder height, it didn't bounce. It didn't clatter. It hit the floor with a wet, heavy thud that sounded disturbingly like a human torso hitting hardwood. I moved to the front door. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. This was the difference between a victim and a tactician. A victim hopes for a good outcome. A tactician engineers it. I unlocked the inner wooden door again. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the warm air of the house one last time. I yanked the door open. The view through the glass storm door was terrifying. The wind was driving snow horizontally against the pane. The porch light, my lethal beacon, flickered slightly in the gale but held steady. The rail glistened, wet and black, energized with 120 volts of silent death. I didn't see her, but I knew she was there. She was probably near the bottom of the driveway or huddled by the bushes, eyes fixed on this rectangle of light. I stepped into the frame of the doorway. I made sure my silhouette was clear against the darkness of the hall. I raised the flashlight, sweeping the beam wildly across the snow-covered lawn, blinding myself with the reflection off the storm door glass. Then I screamed. I didn't scream for help. I screamed the specific trigger words that would override her caution with urgency. "David?" I shrieked, my voice cracking into a high, pitiful wail. "Is that you? Oh God, I think I fell." I let the desperation bleed into the wind. I wanted her to think I was hallucinating. I wanted her to think the cold had finally scrambled my brain, making me see my absent son in the shadows. Then the pratfall. I swung my arm out, hitting the doorframe with a loud crack. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered onto the floor, the beam spinning wildly before coming to rest, pointing at the base of the wall. And then I dropped the flower. I lifted the heavy bag and slammed it down onto the oak floorboards. Thud. The sound was heavy, final. It vibrated through the soles of my boots. I immediately dropped to my knees and sprawled out on the floor, positioning myself so my head and torso were clearly visible through the glass of the storm door, but my legs were safely inside the warm zone. I lay on my side, one arm outstretched toward the door, fingers curled like a dead spider. I kicked the bag of flour out of sight with my foot. Then I went still. The tableau. To an observer looking through the storm door, the scene was tragic and conclusive. The old man, panicked by the power outage and the cold, had tried to rush out. He had tripped on the rug or succumbed to a sudden heart flutter. He had fallen hard. He was lying motionless in the entryway, the inner door wide open, the heat escaping, the cold rushing in. He was helpless. If she wanted to finish the job, or if she just wanted to verify that nature had taken its course, she had to come up those stairs. She had to open that storm door. And to do that on a porch covered in black ice, she would need support. I lay on the floor, my cheek pressed against the cold wood. The draft from the bottom of the storm door chilled my face instantly, but the rest of me was insulated by the heavy coat and the residual heat of the house. I closed my eyes to slits. I watched the rectangle of the glass. "Come on, Jessica. Come check your work." The wait was agonizing. 10 seconds. The wind whistled through the crack in the jamb. 20 seconds. The flashlight beam on the floor cast long, eerie shadows that danced on the ceiling. 30 seconds. Doubt began to creep in. Had she left? Had she frozen to death in the bushes? Did she suspect a trap? No, I told myself. She's greedy. She's anxious. She needs the body. She couldn't just leave me here. If I woke up and called 911 in the morning, her plan was ruined. She needed to ensure I was dead. She needed to stage the scene, maybe drag me fully onto the porch to make it look like I fell outside. She had to touch me. Then I saw it. A hand slapped against the glass of the storm door. It was a gloved hand, black leather. It smeared the condensation on the pane. Then a face pressed against the glass. It was Jessica. She looked deranged. Her skin was waxy and pale, her lips blue. Her hood was blown back, her hair plastered to her skull by the wet snow. Her eyes were wide, frantic, darting from my face to my outstretched hand. She was scanning for life. She was looking for the rise and fall of my chest. I held my breath. I forced my body to be heavy, limp. She stared at me for what felt like an eternity. I could see the gears turning in her frozen brain. Is he dead? Is he unconscious? Is it safe? She tried the handle of the storm door. It was locked. I had locked it from the inside hours ago. She jiggled the handle violently. Rattle, rattle, rattle. She let out a muffled curse. I could hear her voice through the glass, thin, shrill, and angry. "Open, damn it!" She needed leverage. She was standing on the top step, or maybe the second step down. The ice was treacherous. She was slipping. I could see her shoulders jerking as she fought for balance. She needed to force the door. To do that, she needed to plant her feet. To plant her feet on black ice, she needed an anchor. She looked down at the door handle. She looked at me. Then she looked to her right, toward the iron railing. The railing I had polished, the railing she had cleaned, the railing that was currently humming with the full power of the grid. She shifted her weight. She reached out with her right hand. I watched through my eyelashes. It was happening in slow motion. Her hand, encased in the wet, snow-soaked leather glove, extended toward the black metal. The glove was wet. The leather was soaked. Water is a conductor. Salty leather is a conductor. She wasn't reaching for a handhold. She was reaching for the trigger of her own execution. I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't. I had to witness it. I had to know. Her fingers curled around the iron bar. She squeezed. The contact. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the physics took over. 120 volts found the path it had been seeking. It raced from the copper wire into the iron rail, through the wet leather of a glove, into her palm. It shot up her arm, contracting the muscles instantly. The no-let-go threshold was crossed in a millisecond. Her hand clamped onto the rail with the force of a hydraulic vise. The current didn't stop there. It sought the ground. It traveled across her chest, slamming into her heart, scrambling the sinus rhythm into chaotic fibrillation. It traveled down her legs, through her wet boots, into the wet concrete of the step. The circuit was complete. The sound wasn't a scream. You can't scream when your diaphragm is paralyzed by tetanus. It was a sound like a dry branch snapping, a loud guttural huh as all the air was forced out of her lungs at once. Her back arched violently. Her head snapped back, hitting the glass of the storm door with a sickening thud. Her eyes rolled up into her head, showing only the whites. Her body went rigid, vibrating at 60 cycles per second. The lights in the hallway didn't flicker. The breaker outside was a 30-amp monster. It was feeding her everything it had. She stood there, frozen in a grotesque tableau of seizure, her hand fused to the rail, her face pressed against the glass she had been trying to break. She was dancing with the lightning. And I lay on the floor, 5 feet away, safe in the warmth, watching the monster die. 1, 2, 3. The smell hit me first. Ozone, sharp and metallic. Then the smell of singed leather. 4, 5. She was dead. She had to be. No heart can sustain that for 5 seconds. But the breaker still hadn't tripped. Then gravity intervened. Her knees, locked straight by the current, finally buckled as the tendons gave way. Her weight shifted backward. The force of her falling body was stronger than the magnetic grip of the current. Her hand ripped free from the rail. She fell backward, away from the door, away from the light. She tumbled down the 4 concrete steps. Bump, bump, crack. She landed in a heap in the snow at the bottom of the walkway.
Silence returned to the porch. The light hummed steadily. The rail waited for the next victim. I lay there for a moment, exhaling the breath I had been holding. My heart was beating so hard it hurt my ribs. I pushed myself up to a sitting position. I picked up the flashlight. I crawled to the door and looked out the lower pane. A dark shape lay in the snow. It wasn't moving. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but they held. I unlocked the storm door. I pushed it open. The wind hit me, smelling of snow and burnt things. I stepped out onto the porch, careful, so very careful to stay in the center of the mat, far away from the railing. I looked down. Jessica was lying face up. Her eyes were open, staring at the storm clouds. Her right hand was a blackened claw. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt cold. "Audits canceled, Jessica," I whispered. Then I turned back to the house. I had work to do. The police would be here eventually, and I had a scene to reset. But first, I had to trip that breaker. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one elongated by the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I lay on the hardwood floor, my cheek pressed against the oak, my body angled so that the storm door framed me like a portrait of a fallen man.
The draft from the crack beneath the door was a razor blade of cold air slicing against my skin, but I didn't flinch. I was a statue. I was the bait. I listened. The wind was a constant roar, battering the shingles and whistling through the eaves. But I was listening for something specific. I was listening for the heavy, clumsy footsteps of a predator who thinks the trap has finally sprung. Then I saw her. She didn't come from the driveway. She emerged from the side of the house, rounding the corner by the hydrangeas. She looked like a specter. The beam of the porch light caught her, turning the falling snow into a halo around her silhouette. She was huddled inside her coat, her arms wrapped tight around her chest. She was moving with the jerky, uncoordinated gait of someone whose core temperature has dropped below 95 degrees. Hypothermia is a cruel intoxicant. It strips away reason. It leaves only the primal imperatives: heat, safety. End this. She stopped at the edge of the walkway. She stared up at the porch. She saw the open inner door. She saw the light spilling out into the hall. And she saw me. I lay motionless, my hand outstretched, the flashlight I had dropped casting a long, jagged shadow across the wall. To her, I was a corpse, or at least a dying man. A normal person would have pulled out their phone. A normal person would have screamed for help. A normal person would have been paralyzed by shock. Jessica ran. She didn't run away. She ran toward me.
It wasn't a run of concern. It was a sprint of confirmation. She needed to know. She needed to close the book on Arthur so she could open the book on the insurance payout. She needed to be the first one on the scene to control the narrative. She hit the walkway, her boots crunching heavily in the snow. She was moving too fast. Her judgment was gone, frozen out of her brain hours ago. I watched through half-closed eyes, my heart hammering against the floorboards. Slow down, I thought. Look at the steps. Look at the shine. She didn't look. She was fixated on the prize inside the door. She reached the base of the concrete stairs. There are 4 steps. The bottom 2 were covered in snow. The top 2 were sheltered by the porch overhang, protected from the accumulation, but exposed to the wind. Those top 2 steps were where she had poured the water. She took the first step. Crunch. Safe. She took the second step. Crunch. Safe. She lunged for the third step. This is the physics of a fall. It happens faster than thought. It happens in the gap between synapses. Her right boot hit the concrete, but it didn't find friction. It found a sheet of black ice, smooth as a mirror and hard as diamond. Her forward momentum was considerable. When her foot lost purchase, that momentum had nowhere to go but out. Her leg shot forward, straight up into the air, as if pulled by a wire. It was a classic violent slip, the kind that makes crowds wince. She was airborne for a fraction of a second, her arms windmilled, flailing desperately for purchase in the empty air. Step 3. Instinct takes over. The human brain is hardwired for arboreal survival. When we fall, we reach, we grasp. We seek a branch, a vine, a rock, anything to arrest the descent. Jessica was falling backward. Her center of gravity was gone. She was twisting to her right, toward the railing. She didn't see the copper wire. She didn't see the trap. She saw a sturdy iron bar that could save her from a cracked skull. Her right hand lashed out. It was a desperate, clawing motion. Her black leather glove slammed onto the top rail of the iron banister. Her fingers curled around the metal in a death grip. The connection. The moment her skin, damp with sweat inside the sodden, snow-soaked leather, made electrical contact with the energized rail, the world seemed to pause. It wasn't a spark. It wasn't a flash. It was a sound. Crack. It sounded like a bullwhip breaking the sound barrier inside a small room. It was the sound of air expanding instantly as 120 volts of electricity arc-welded her hand to the iron. She didn't scream. The current bypassed her vocal cords. It seized her diaphragm instantly, expelling every cubic inch of air from her lungs in a sharp guttural hiss. Her body went rigid. It was horrific to watch. One moment she was a falling woman, flailing and chaotic. The next, she was a statue, frozen in a contorted, impossible angle. The no-let-go phenomenon is the electrician's nightmare. The alternating current cycles 60 times a second. Each cycle forces the muscles to contract.
The flexor muscles in the hand are stronger than the extensors. The electricity forced her hand to close tighter, locking her onto the source of her destruction. She hung there, suspended by her own electrified grip, her feet dangling inches above the icy steps. A low, buzzing hum filled the air, the sound of the transformer on the pole outside groaning under the load. Then came the smell. It hit me even through the cold draft. Ozone, sharp, metallic, like a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle. And beneath that, the sickly sweet, acrid stench of burning keratin, burning hair, burning skin. She shook. It wasn't the shivering of the cold anymore. It was the violent, vibrating frequency of the grid. Her head whipped back and forth, her teeth clacking together with a sound like dice in a cup. I watched. I didn't look away. I owed her that. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. A normal 15-amp breaker would have tripped by now. The GFCI she removed would have tripped in a millisecond. But the 30-amp breaker she had installed, the one she taped open, held the line. It was feeding the fault. It was treating her body like a heavy-duty appliance. Her eyes rolled back, showing stark white in the porch light. Smoke began to curl from the cuff of her glove.
Trip, I thought. Damn it. Trip. I didn't want to cook her. I just wanted to stop her. Finally, the physics of heat won out. The copper wire I had wrapped around the bolt heated up. The insulation melted. The connection arced, creating a dead short against the mounting bracket. Pop! A loud, dull thud echoed from the side of the house. The porch light died. The hum stopped. The silence rushed back in, deafening and heavy. Gravity reclaimed its rights. With the current gone, the muscles in her hand relaxed. Her grip failed. She fell. She didn't tumble. She dropped like a sack of wet cement. She hit the steps hard, thud, thud, and slid down the icy ramp she had created, coming to rest in the snow at the bottom of the walkway. She lay face up. Her arm was flung out to the side, the leather glove smoking faintly in the cold air. I lay on the floor for another 10 seconds, just breathing. My heart was racing, skipping beats. I waited for movement. I waited for a groan. Nothing. Just the wind, blowing the snow over the dark shape in the yard. I slowly pushed myself up to a sitting position. My joints popped. I felt old, older than I had ever felt. I picked up the flashlight and clicked it on. I shone the beam through the storm door. The light washed over her. She was staring at the sky. Her face was a mask of shock, frozen in a silent scream. She wasn't getting up. I switched off the flashlight. "You should have checked the breaker, Jessica," I whispered to the dark hallway. I reached for the door handle to close it. The cold was getting in. Phase 1 was complete. The threat was neutralized. Now came Phase 2, the cleanup, the police, the story. I had to be the grieving father-in-law. I had to be the confused old man who woke up in the dark and found a tragedy. But first, I needed to get rid of that copper wire. I stood up, grabbing my cane. Wait, I didn't have my cane. She hid it. I grabbed the umbrella from the stand. I opened the door and stepped out into the storm. I had a crime scene to sanitize, and I had about 20 minutes before the neighbors noticed the commotion.
I didn't call 911 immediately. That would have been a mistake. The human body is resilient. Paramedics can restart a heart that has only been stopped for a few minutes. I needed to be sure that the silence on the front porch was permanent. I went back into the kitchen. The power to the house was still out, killed by the main disconnect she had pulled outside, but the gas stove still worked. I lit a burner with a match, the blue flame hissing in the quiet bark. I put the kettle on. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the steam rise. I thought about the phone line. I had unplugged it from the wall jack in the hallway hours ago, feigning a storm outage. I waited 45 minutes. I drank a cup of tea. I ate a stale biscuit. I let my heart rate return to a resting 60 beats per minute. Only then did I move. I walked to the hallway and plugged the phone line back in. I picked up the receiver. A clear, crisp dial tone hummed in my ear. I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? I let my voice tremble. I let the confused old man take the wheel one last time. My daughter-in-law, I stammered. She went out to check the fuse box. The lights went out. I heard a noise. She's lying in the snow. She won't wake up." The response was slow due to the blizzard. It took them 20 minutes to plow up the driveway. I watched from the window as the red and blue lights washed over the white landscape. I watched the paramedics slip and slide on the driveway as they rushed to the dark shape at the bottom of the steps. I watched them check for a pulse. I watched them shake their heads. They didn't rush her to the ambulance. They covered her with a yellow tarp. A police cruiser pulled up behind the ambulance. A young officer, Officer Miller, I knew his father, came to the door. He had to be careful walking up the path. He nearly slipped on the ice himself. He pounded on the door. I opened it, wrapped in my blanket, looking small and frail. "Mr. Penhaligon?" he asked, stamping snow off his boots. "I'm so sorry. You need to come sit down. It's freezing in here." "Is she?" I asked. "I'm sorry, sir. She's gone." They brought me into the living room. They used flashlights until one of the firemen went around the side of the house and flipped the main disconnect back on. The lights flared to life. The furnace kicked in. I sat there, clutching my mug, while they worked the scene. I heard the murmur of voices on the porch, the flash of cameras, then the heavy boots of the fire chief coming into the hallway. He was holding a plastic bag. Inside was the wire. "Mr. Penhaligon," he said gently, "we found something on the porch." I looked up, eyes wide. "What?" "It looks like Mrs. Penhaligon was trying to rig up some kind of de-icing system," the chief said, shaking his head. "We found a wire running from the light fixture to the railing. It looks like she was trying to run current through the rail to melt the ice on the steps. We see people try crazy DIY stuff like this in bad storms." I blinked. It was a better lie than I could have invented. She hated the ice," I whispered. "She was washing the porch all week." "Well, that explains the water," the chief sighed. "She must have slipped on the ice she was trying to melt. When she fell, she grabbed the rail. Since she'd bypassed the ground fault, well, it was instant." "An accident?" I asked. "A tragic, freak accident," the chief said. "She taped the breaker open, sir. She must have known it would trip if she didn't. Dangerous. Reckless." He put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Arthur. She was trying to help in her own way. It just went wrong." "Yes," I said, looking at the floor to hide the cold clarity in my eyes. "She was always trying to fix things." David arrived 4 hours later. He was a wreck. He cried in my arms, sobbing about how he should have been there, how he shouldn't have gone to Cleveland. I let him cry. I didn't tell him the truth. He didn't need to know his wife was a murderer. He just needed to know she was gone. The truth about the rest of it came out 3 days later. Tuesday morning, the day of the audit. 2 suits from the hospital administration showed up at the door, accompanied by a detective from the fraud division. They were looking for Jessica. When David told them she was dead, their faces went blank. They sat us down at the kitchen table. They opened a laptop. "Mr. Penhaligon," the detective said to David, "we have evidence that your wife has been diverting Class A narcotics from the hospital inventory for 6 months. We estimate the street value at over $200,000. David went pale. "That's impossible. Jessica?" "We also found communications on her phone," the detective continued. "She was in significant debt to unauthorized lenders. We believe she intended to flee the country or liquidate assets." He looked at me. "Arthur," the detective said, "did she recently ask about your life insurance?" I took a sip of my coffee. "It mentioned it. Wanted to make sure the policy was up to date." David put his head in his hands. The realization washed over him. The urgency of the trip, the lies about her mother, the accident on the porch. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, she—" "It's over, son," I said softly. "The debt was hers, the crime was hers. It's over." The drug dealers, Mike or whoever he was, never called. With Jessica dead and the police swarming the house for the embezzlement investigation, I assumed they decided the heat wasn't worth the squeeze. They cut their losses. 2 months later, the snow is gone. The crocuses are pushing up through the soil in the front yard. David moved back in with me. He's slowly piecing his life back together. He sold Jessica's car. He used the small life insurance payout from her work policy to pay off the mortgage on the house. I'm sitting on the front porch in my rocking chair. The sun is warm on my face. I look at the railing. I hired a contractor last week. The black iron is gone. In its place is a beautiful hand-sanded cedar railing. It smells of fresh wood and varnish. It's warm to the touch. I run my hand along the smooth grain. People talk about blood being thicker than water. They say family is everything, but they forget that family is just a genetic roll of the dice. Loyalty is a choice. Dignity is a choice. Jessica made her choice. She chose the cold. I take a sip of my coffee, feeling the heat spread through my chest. I prefer wood. I don't like shocks anymore.